My name is Betty Krause. Let me guide you on a journey into the world of abstract art where you have total freedom and where the art you create is only limited to your imagination. On my show, I'll introduce you to techniques, tools, and tips to turn your imagination into art. Together, we'll add a little more color into this world. Abstractly yours, Betty Krause. Welcome to Abstractly Yours. Today I'm going to introduce you to abstract art using only a few art supplies. First, we're going to start off with some exercises to loosen up, and then we'll build up texture and layers using mark-making tools and paint. In the end, we'll wrap it up with some final details. We're going to first start by introducing you to some of the supplies we're going to be using today. Over here I have Bristol paper, which this is a 9x12, and it is paper that is extremely smooth. There's a variety of different papers you can use, but today we're going to be using Bristol paper. For brushes, I brought a variety of brushes. Now, as you can see, these brushes are not in perfect shape, and I prefer them that way because when I'm creating the type of art that I create, I don't want perfect bristles. So we're going to be using a variety of different brushes. You can also use longer brushes. Today I'm going to stick with the shorter ones, but longer ones are great when you're trying to loosen up. I've also got a few tools to use that you can find around the house, and these are great for mark making. So I've got a skewer here. You can see it's been used already, a nail, and also a toothpick. So we'll be using that throughout the process. Here I've got a spatula that I got from the dollar store, and it works great when we start off by spreading out the gesso to prime our paper before we start. I've also got a palette knife so that we can scoop out paint from the jars. In terms of mark making tools, I've got just a regular number 2 pencil. This one I use often. I've got several different Sharpie China markers. They come in a variety of colors. They also come in blue and red, but I prefer these 3 here, black, white, and yellow. Next, we've got a Stabilo pencil. Stabilo pencil is great for mark making when you want to add some water to it or even some paint to it to kind of dilute it a little bit. It is water soluble, so that means that it is not permanent. And today we'll be using it, and I'll show you what that looks like. Next, I've got these Prismacolor watercolor pencils, which I absolutely love. I've got a large package of them, but as you can tell, these are some of my favorites. You can tell the really short ones being my favorite ones, so I'll show you how I use those today. I like using an eraser throughout the process, so I'm going to introduce that to you. I've got Neocolor 2 water-soluble crayons. These are well loved and well used, and I'll show you how we use those. Again, water soluble, so that means that they are not permanent. Moving on, I've got my handy dandy little sprayer that's got a lot of use with the paint on it. I've got Liquitex gesso. Liquitex is my favorite gesso because it comes in a bottle, so it's easy for me to just squeeze out, and this we're going to be using to get started. So when we work on paper, we want to make sure that we put down a layer of gesso to coat it so that all of our paint colors are not being absorbed into the paper. So I'll show you how we do that today. Today I'm going to be using Novacolor paints, and Novacolor being my favorite one. They're a Southern California company, and their colors are fabulous. Their pigmentation is excellent, and I really have enjoyed using them. I'll also talk a little bit about a few other varieties. If you are on a budget, I'll show you what you can be using instead. And then I've got my bucket of water. So those are a few things that we'll be using today. All right, so before we get all of our paints out and start playing with those, we're going to loosen up a little bit. I like to do this at the beginning of all of my painting sessions where I'm just going to make some marks and just relax a little bit and just go with the flow, whatever marks I put out, and that's going to help me loosen up and relax so that we can get into the painting mode. So we're going to start by doing a few exercises just to loosen up. And the way we're going to do that is we can just use a number 2 pencil, and I'm going to ask you to do a couple of different things. So first thing we're going to do is, I am right-handed, so I'm going to start with the pencil in my right hand. And when I use the pencil, I'm going to use it at the tip. We're not going to write like we're writing to someone, but we're going to hold it at the very tip. And we're just going to make marks loosely around the whole page. And there is no right or wrong way of doing this. Everyone's got their own way of making marks. So that's one thing that you can do. So that's a great way to get started. Now another way is, we're going to put it in your non-dominant hand, and instead of looking at the page like we did on this first one, I was looking right down and I can see what I was doing. This time what we're going to do is we're going to not look at our page, and we're going to look around the room. We're just going to follow any lines that we see around the room. So I see something that's kind of semi-round. I see some lines over here. I'm not trying to draw any particular item. I'm just looking at different lines that are around the room. I'm going to go off my page. I can hear that I'm going off my page. And I'm just doing this very loosely. I pick up my pencil, I move it to another spot, and just following whatever I see. And now if we take that and we compare it to the first one, you can see that this one is a bit more organic. This one I could see what I was doing, so my lines are a lot straighter or smoother, and in this one, not as much. So this is a great way to loosen up if you're not sure what you want to do or how to get those lines going. Just take a look around the room and don't look at your page, and that's going to help you loosen up. So that's one way of doing it. And then what we can do is we can introduce, and today what I'm using is just copy paper. You can use any kind of paper you want for warm-up exercises. So I'm going to use this time my Stabilo pencil, and I'm going to again use my non-dominant hand. I'm partially looking at the page, partially not. And I'm just going to make lines. And again, trying to hold it as far back as possible so that you're not being really rigid about it. So that's a way to loosen up. And then what you can do is you can take your brush and dip it in some water and just put some water over that, and you can kind of see how those lines darken a bit, and you're making some softer areas and some darker areas. And that's one way to loosen up and put down some lines on your page. All right, so when you get a chance, give that a try. You can do the same thing with all of your colored pencils as well. And you can do, instead of just holding in one hand, try doing it with both hands and see what you get. Sometimes I'll do this when I want to get going. So give that a try. Here's a Stabilo pencil, a black one and a yellow one. Again, doing the same thing. One in my dominant hand, one in my non-dominant hand. And there is, again, no right or wrong when you're making your marks. Just put down marks and just loosen up and kind of allow yourself to explore and experiment. All right, so now that we've warmed up with some exercises, we're going to move right along, and we're going to be using Bristol paper today. And what I did was, instead of using the full sheet, I took one and I cut it in half. So that's what we'll be using today. So in order for us to get started, we want to put down a layer of gesso. And the reason we do that is because paper is very absorbent. So when we start putting down paint, it's going to absorb right into this. We don't want that to happen. So we're going to be using Liquitex gesso today. This is one of my favorite ones. It comes in this very large size, and I like it because I can just pour it right on. Just pouring a little bit out, not too much. The more you pour out, the longer it's going to take for it to dry. And using the spatula, we're going to spread that around. And it doesn't have to be perfect. Actually, if it's not perfect, it's even better. When you miss some of it and you don't cover it entirely, it adds more interest to your final piece. So I'm just going to spread that around quickly. And with the edge here, I'm going to start my mark making right away and adding texture. So I'm going to make some marks this way. And because I don't like perfect marks, I'm going to just wipe back some of those. And then we'll also use our mark making tools. I've got a toothpick here, which has got a nice fine line to it. And I'm just going to make some marks with that. And then again, I'll come in and I'll take out a little bit of that. And that's all we need to do there. And now we're going to set this aside to dry, and then we'll get started with the paints. So now that the gesso is dry, we can go ahead and start with mark making. Mark making is one of the first things that I really enjoy doing. And again, we did this in our exercises, so I'm going to start with the pencil again. And I'm just going to start making some marks on my paper here. I can press down harder to make darker marks. And I like to hold it at the tip so that it's nice and loose. And let's add some color. Of course, one of my favorite, this light aqua. I love teal. Add that to just about everything I do. And let's switch it up. How about some orange? And how about a little bit with my non-dominant hand, and also looking around the room. And I'm going to bring in a China marker here, a black one. And I'm pressing pretty hard on this one so that we can see those lines a bit darker. And then the last one I want to try today is the Stabilo pencil. And again, I mentioned earlier, this is water soluble, so that means when we put some water on it, you're going to see that it's not going to stay in place, as opposed to our China marker, which is permanent. So the China marker, let's see where, if I can find my China marker, doesn't move around so much as the Stabilo pencil does. So let's just put down a few of those marks. And then I'm going to take some water and let's find where that Stabilo pencil was. You can see how it darkens up in those spaces. So these marks are not going to show up at the very end, but for me it's part of the process. I really enjoy doing this part of it. So that's going to get us started. And we're going to let that dry a little bit, and then we'll move on with adding some color. Now that this has dried, we can go ahead and add a little bit more mark making. So I'm going to be using these Neocolor 2 water-soluble crayons, and I'm just going to pick a few of my favorite colors, and I'm just going to put those right over what we've already done. And so I'm already starting to build up some texture and some lines by adding another layer. How about this blue? And the fun thing with this is sometimes I'll put down a layer of it in one area, and later when we come through and we've got layers of paint and I scratch through, this color is going to peek through. So we'll put down this color in a few places like this. And then later, hopefully, I'll be able to show you what that looks like when it's peeking through. And let's go back to this nice yellow. I'm going to put down a little bit more of it in a couple of areas. And on this stage of the process, really anything goes. There's no right or wrong way to put this down. Wherever you'd like to put some color down, put it down. I'm going to add some bright red in here as well. All right, so I think that'll be good for now. All right, so now we're ready for the fun stuff. We're going to get out our paints and get those out on our palette so that we can start putting down paint on our paper that we just put down mark making. Now, I've been using Nova Color paints for about 3 or 4 years now, and I really love the pigmentation in these paints. Excellent quality of color. Look at this blue, isn't that beautiful? This is called ultramarine blue. And there are a variety of different types of paints that you can get out there on the market. And this one in particular I like because these are fluid acrylic paints as opposed to heavy body, which are thicker paints, or high flow, which are a lot thinner. And so this to me is the exact consistency that I like when I am painting. So we're just going to put out a few of these colors that we'll be using today, and I'm just wiping down my palette as we go. And we're going to do some cool colors and some warm colors. So our cool colors are our blues and greens, and our warm colors are oranges, our reds, our yellows. So we'll do a few of each, and then we can start putting down color and mixing color. One thing that I love to do as I go is mix colors. And let's get this magenta color here. And I think we've got one more that we're going to put down, and that's this teal. I'm going to wipe down my palette knife so that I'm not doing too much double dipping. And we really don't need a lot of paints when we're working on a small piece such as this one. All right, and those are our colors that we'll get started with today. And I've got a couple of brushes here that we'll be using. All right, so now we've got some colors we can use. But before we actually get into all of those colors, I'm going to get the black out. So I always start with black. After I do all of my mark making, then I start with some black. And the reason for that is because I really like black peeking through on the final layers, but I don't know where it's going to peek through. So I just go ahead and grab some out of the jar, and I'm just going to put some down. And some people think, wow, that's a lot of black, but you'll see we're going to be covering up pretty much all of it. And this is just going to allow us to start building some texture and layers. So I'm going to grab, how about we grab the nail this time, and I'm going to scratch right into that. And so here you can already see that some of that red that I had underneath is popping through, some green over here as well. Look, we've got blue over here, so that's starting to show through. So that's a way to start building up texture. All right, so I'm going to let that dry, and then we're going to come back and we're going to start adding some color. Okay, now that we've got some of that black dried, I'm going to use my gesso again, and I like to use gesso as my white paint as opposed to purchasing white paint separately. And one of the main reasons is because I really like the way it continues to build up texture as I paint. So I like to just spread it here because I'm going to use it with most of my colors. So let's grab one of my paint brushes. I like these old ones that have been worn down a bit. And we'll pick a color here. And I always like to dip in white. Very rarely do I use the color directly. And so we're going to start with just making some marks again. And let's see, I'm going to stick with the cool colors first. If I move over and I pull in red or these other colors, then I'm going to end up making mud. So I like to stick with cool colors, and then I'll switch over to warm colors. So I'm just going to go through this process where I'm making marks, and I've got a small space that I'm working with, so I might switch out to even a smaller brush. And let's do a little bit of this teal color, one of my favorites. And I'm going to switch out to a smaller brush. I'm going to wet my brush a little bit. And let's just mix these colors as we go. I am thinking about my inspiration, which all comes from fields of flowers. So when I'm putting down marks, they're representing different things in nature, and more specifically, different shapes that I see when I'm looking at fields of flowers. And I'm not trying to avoid, I'm not working my way around what's already there, because if I do that, then I'm going to make it kind of one-dimensional. So I've got some spaces left here, and I'm okay with that, because then we're going to introduce the warm colors over here, and we're going to start adding those in. So I'm just going to wipe down my brush, and often I will work wet on wet, meaning I'm going to start introducing these colors even though these are not completely dry yet, and that's okay. I'm going to try to work around some of those. And so you can see I'm already starting to cover up what was on that first layer. And what I really enjoy about this process is you don't get attached to any one layer. You get to keep building it up until you get to a point that you really like it. I'm going to introduce this one. This is called a rigger, and you need to wet it down. And I'm just going to put it over here. And this one is beautiful for making nice fine lines. So let's introduce some thinner lines here, and it'll make some thicker lines as well, depending on how hard I press down on it. Let's add some over here. So normally I work with more of a dry brush, meaning I have very little paint on there, but when it comes to this rigger, I want to make it as wet as possible so that I can be able to move it around and the paint flows off of it much better. If I just dip straight into this color, I wouldn't get the flow that I would want to be able to make these marks. So at this point I start thinking about where I can start taking areas that are really chaotic and starting to mellow them out a bit. But before I do that, let's use this toothpick. I want to add some more texture while the paint is still wet, so you can see how I'm kind of pulling some of those colors that were underneath, like right here. There's a lot of red showing through from that first layer, which was from our crayon. So you can see the crayon peeking through right there. Let's scratch through a little bit more. There's some yellow showing through. And so when I'm painting, this process is one where it allows me to just be intuitive, and I don't come in and I don't say, well, this is what I'm going to create today. There are some colors that really work well together. For example, actually I just got a little bit of red on there. It's making purple. So I've got red here, and if I put some teal next to that, this really pretty color here, the blue-green, that makes it stand out even more. So sometimes I'll look at my colors and I'll put colors next to each other that what I call play well together, and they really complement each other and allow each one to stand out even more. So here I'm making a little bit of mud because I've pulled in the green with the red and whatever else is on my brush, and it's darkening that area. And that's okay. If I decide later I don't like that, I can come back in once it's dry and put another color over it. So this process of building up layers is all about doing it until you get to a point that you're happy with the colors that you see on top, that final layer. So don't be afraid that if there's a color in there that you say, oh, I really don't like that. See, I can already come in and start covering that up with another color. Again, if you stick with just your cool colors or your warm colors, you're not going to get that kind of dulled out colors in between. So try to keep those separate as much as possible. And if you need to, go ahead and stop and dry what you've got. You can just use a regular hair dryer or a heating tool. If you've got craft supplies, a lot of people like to use heating tools. And that'll help you keep those two colors separated so that you can continue to build up color. What I want to do is I'm going to use that toothpick again. Let's get a little bit of texture going. So we've got that going. We've got some scratching and some other colors showing through. Let's see. What other color, what do I want down here? Probably my favorite color, which is teal. Let's see, it's a darker teal here. So I'm going to go over it, but notice that I'm not going to cover all that green that was underneath because I want that to peek through a bit and show so that you can see that there's some history there. Like we're getting there, but it's not quite there yet. I'm not crazy about this corner here, so I'm going to do something with that. Let's see, maybe some of this Indian yellow. Maybe that's too bright. Let's see, darken that a bit. Maybe let a little bit of that show through. So this is the process I go through. No color is the final color until I say I'm completely done. So that might work a little bit better now. I still feel like there's a lot of chaos going on. I feel like there's areas that I need to quiet down a little bit more. So let me work some more colors in there that are a bit more solid. So let's go with some of this green. But I still like a lot of the texture to show through, so it's a real balance between having some areas that are calm and not making them so opaque. So if I was to come in and just darken an area, let's see, this is probably not the best one. I don't want to put on a thick layer like that because I like when you can see some of that history showing through. So that means coming through several times and adding color until it's calm enough, but yet there's a lot of interest still going on. Yeah, might come back with that, with a different color there. One other thing that I wanted to show today is doing drips, and I know we're kind of working on small paper, but I think we can still do that. I'm going to go with something a bit darker. I'm going to put a line of paint up here, and then I'm going to take my spray bottle, and I'm going to, let's see if I can do that so that you can see what we're doing, is I'm going to just spray it here, and that's going to allow drips to come down. So we're going to let that run down. And again, just adding some interest. I'm going to wipe this back here. And sometimes what I'll do is I'll come through, let that dry a little bit, and then I'm going to pat it. And what it'll do is it'll pick up some of the paint that I already put down, and that adds some interesting texture to it and lines. And I'll smooth out this so that we don't have a chunk of blue at the top. And I'm going to take a moment to dry this top part so that we can finish this up. All right, so I just got back from drying that previous layer. We're going to continue to build up layers. I wanted to dry that layer because we've got warm colors and cool colors that we're using, and I don't want to blend them too much. So we dried that, and we're just going to continue going through and adding marks and creating layers upon layer until we get to the very end, and we can finish that up with some mark making. All right, now I've dried this section up here, which needs a little bit of attention, so let's finish up with some lighter colors up here. I think that's going to look better than what we've got going right now. So I've got white here and a little bit of color that was left on my brush. Just going to kind of fill in this area a bit. And letting that green pop through. And the reds over here. And I don't have a whole lot of paint on my brush, so I'm really doing more of a dry brush technique here. And that just allows some of these other previous layers to pop through. So I've got some color balancing going on here. I've got a lighter pink up here. I've got a darker pink down here. Not really crazy about that dark pink. I like that orangey color, so might come back in with that orangey color down here instead of this pink here. Just seems kind of like a dark pink and not as bright. So let's see if I can recreate this color. I'm gonna use the red that I have over here and then some white, and it's going to lighten that up a bit. I'm liking that much better, but I don't want it to balance with that too much, so I might just pull this up a bit more up this way. There we go, and I'm good with this. I can see a little bit of the color poking through there, so that's looking good to me. And I'm not going to worry about really finishing this off entirely because we've got one more thing that we're going to do at the end here, and that is come back through with some mark making with the items that we used earlier, and that's going to finish this up and give it some more interest and just add that final layer. So I'm going to let this dry, and then we'll come in with that mark making and we'll wrap it up from there. All right, so we just got back from drawing our final layer, and we're ready to finish this piece up with some interesting marks using mark making tools, our colored pencils, and then we're also going to scratch into it a bit, and we're going to reveal some of the colors that were underneath. All right. Now that I have completely dried this, we're ready for our final step in our process. And first it would be to remove paint from my hands. All right, so we're going to go back to our mark making, so using pencils. And I often will start with a color that is already on my paper. So this color, I can see it's right here. And I do that just so I can see how much of that color is showing through. And now I can move it somewhere else and make marks somewhere else. So that just gets me comfortable with the use of that particular color. So here you're barely going to be able to see it. So let me grab another color. How about using this aqua color? And I'm going to come in here and I'm just going to make some tick marks. And now we see red because I used the Neocolor 2 red underneath here. And as I make these marks, it's kind of pulling that paint away and allowing that to show through. And now, I talked about my eraser earlier. Let me grab that. So I've got these circles, and I don't always like them to be perfect, so I'll come in with an eraser, and I'll just erase away a little bit of it so that you can see a hint that there were circles there. So that's one way that I like to use my eraser. And you can do that with the colored pencils as well. You can, if you put down marks that you don't like, you can easily erase those. So let's go through. I'm going to make some more circles around these. There we go, and then I'm going to add some extra. So I circled these marks here, but I'm making some extra circles just to add some interest so it doesn't look like I'm only trying to circle that kind of yellow-green color that I've got. And let's go, I'm going to switch over to some pink. And next I'm going to grab my China marker, my white one. This is a Sharpie. And I'm going to come through, and sometimes some areas that I've already got light, I might come through and lighten those a little bit more. So just adding some in there. And then if I didn't like that, again, I can take my eraser and I can just erase that. And that takes it out, but actually I did like that, so let's go back in and put that in. So I wanted to show you that because you don't have to worry if you did something that you're really not crazy about, you can easily remove it. So I'm adding some white through here, kind of highlighting some areas. And with your finger you can actually rub that in a bit if you want to smooth it out. So I think I'm okay with the amount that we used there. I'm going to now use my yellow China marker, and let's see, just thinking about where I can make some marks. I'm good with that. I like that. I'm going to go back to my teal again, and I just want to add, I put some over here, but you're not really showing through very much. And I don't want to put too much because I've got some teal green running through here, so I don't want to fight with it too much. How about we add some over here? So this process for me is just wherever I feel like I can use some lines and looking at different shapes of lines. So we've got some small markings here and down here. We've got some kind of mid-sized circles through here and down here. We've got these larger pink circles that we made with the paint, so that adds some interest. Then we've got some solid circles as well that are kind of not quite circle, more oblong. So we've got plenty of variety happening. And let me go back to my pencil. The other thing I like to do is I like to come in and I just like to scribble. So I'm just going to add some scribbles through here. And then I like to come in with my eraser and just erase back a little bit of that so that it's not a continuous line through that section. There we go. And that is going to wrap it up. Really happy with the way it turned out. I'm liking all the colors that were used here. I like that the red is really popping a lot here. I love my stepping stones that I've added in here as well. And then especially finishing it off with the mark making. So we're all set for today. Hope you guys enjoyed watching that come together. I want to leave you with this. Art is a process and it takes practice. Keep on experimenting and exploring. I'll see you next time on Abstractly Yours.